A single railway line could rewrite the rules of global trade forever. China just revived a $72 billion mega-project that was declared dead for over a decade. A railroad so ambitious it would slice straight through an entire continent, bypass one of the world's most congested choke points, and potentially shift the balance of economic power across two oceans. This is the story of the railway that refuses to die. Act 1. The resurrection of a forgotten dream. Picture this. Cargo leaving the coast of Brazil, crossing thousands of kilometers of mountains, rainforests, and plateaus, and arriving at a Pacific port in Peru, all without a single ship, canal toll, or month-long detour around the southern tip of the continent. Sounds like science fiction, right? But it's not. It's called the Bioceanic Railway Corridor, and after disappearing from headlines for nearly a decade, it's back. Bigger, bolder, and backed by one of the most powerful infrastructure machines on the planet, China. In late 2024, something remarkable happened in Peru. A massive deep-water port called Chancay officially began operations on the Pacific coast. Built in partnership with China COSCO Shipping, this wasn't just another dock. It was a $3.5 billion statement of intent, a gateway designed to handle the kind of cargo volume that connects continents, not just countries. And with that port now online, the long-dormant railway project has suddenly roared back to life. Here's why this matters. For more than a century, South America has been geographically trapped. If you want to move goods between the Atlantic and Pacific coasts, you've got two options. One, sail north through the Panama Canal, which is expensive, slow, and increasingly congested. One, or take the long route around Cape Horn at the bottom of the continent, a journey so dangerous it's been nicknamed the graveyard of ships. But what if there was a third option? A land bridge, a railway corridor cutting straight across the heart of South America, linking ocean to ocean in a matter of days instead of weeks. That's the vision. And it's not new. In fact, this idea has been circulating in some form since 2004, when a handful of South American nations first floated the concept. But back then, it was little more than a conversation, a dream on paper with no budget, no blueprint, and no real momentum. It wasn't until around 2010 that serious discussions began. Engineers started mapping routes, economists ran feasibility studies, and by 2015, the project had a name, a proposed path, and international attention. The plan called for a railway stretching roughly 4,500 kilometers across Bolivia, Peru, and Brazil, with an eye-watering price tag of up to $72 billion. To put that in perspective, that's more than the GDP of many countries. It's the kind of investment that takes decades to pay off, if it ever does. But the potential payoff was enormous. 1. A complete reimagining of South American logistics. 1. A direct artery between two oceans. 1. And a serious challenge to the dominance of maritime choke points like the Panama Canal. So what happened? Why did it take nearly 10 years for this project to go from headline news to radio silence? And why is it suddenly back now? Act 2. The collapse and the chaos. Let's rewind to 2015. The Bioceanic Railway was on every infrastructure shortlist. Brazil, Bolivia, and Peru were all officially on board. China had expressed interest. International development banks were watching closely. Everything seemed aligned. And then the wheels came off. The first crack appeared in Brazil. In 2016, President Dilma Rousseff was impeached in a dramatic political scandal that sent shockwaves through the country. When the new administration took power, national priorities shifted almost overnight. Infrastructure projects that had been championed by the previous government were suddenly placed under review, delayed, or quietly shelved. The Bioceanic Railway was one of them. Around the same time, Peru's government began waffling on its commitment to the project. There were debates about which port should serve as the Pacific terminus. There were concerns about cost overruns. There were competing political factions pulling in different directions. and with each passing month, the momentum slowed. Meanwhile, Bolivia, the country literally in the middle of the proposed route, was facing its own internal challenges. Political instability, economic pressures, and a lack of clear consensus on the railway's route all contributed to a growing sense of uncertainty. Here's the brutal truth about mega infrastructure projects. They require more than money. They require political will, continuity, and coordination across multiple governments. And when you're talking about a railway that crosses 3 countries, passes through some of the most challenging terrain on Earth, and costs more than $70 billion, even a small shift in political winds can be catastrophic. And that's exactly what happened. By 2019, Bolivia officially withdrew from the project. The reason? A combination of political gridlock, financial concerns, and a lack of agreement on the final route. Without Bolivia, the entire corridor was effectively dead. You can't build a transcontinental railway if the country in the middle says no. Brazil tried to pivot. Officials proposed a new route that would bypass Bolivia entirely, running directly from Brazilian territory through the state of Acre and into Peru. On paper, it solved the political problem, but it created a logistical nightmare. This alternative route would have forced the railway through the Amazon rainforest and straight into the Andes Mountains, 2 of the most geologically complex and ecologically sensitive regions on the planet. The terrain is harsh, the environmental regulations are strict, and the cost? Astronomical. Engineers estimated that building through untouched rainforest and mountain ranges would require massive tunneling, extensive bridge construction, and years of environmental impact assessments. There was virtually no existing infrastructure to build on, which meant starting from scratch in one of the most remote and difficult environments imaginable. By contrast, the original route through Bolivia, while still challenging, had significant advantages. Bolivia already had portions of a railway network in place. The terrain, though mountainous, was more manageable. And most importantly, Bolivia sits at a natural elevation plateau that makes east-west rail construction far more feasible than hacking through jungle and scaling Andean peaks. But none of that mattered if Bolivia wasn't willing to participate. So the project stalled. Funding dried up. International investors moved on. And by 2020, the Bioceanic Railway had all but vanished from public discourse. It became one of those grand ideas that never quite made it off the drawing board, a cautionary tale about the difficulty of aligning politics, money, and ambition across borders. Until 2024. Act 3. China's Grand Entrance. In November 2024, the Chancay port in Peru officially opened for business. It was a quiet event by global standards. No major international summit, no wall-to-wall media coverage. But for those paying attention, it was a seismic shift. Chancay isn't just a port, it's a strategic asset. Located about 60 kilometers north of Lima, it's one of the largest and most technologically advanced ports in South America. It can handle the biggest container ships in the world. It has direct rail and highway links, and it was built in just 5 years, a timeline that stunned industry observers who are used to infrastructure projects dragging on for decades. How did it happen so fast? Simple. China COSCO Shipping, one of the largest shipping companies in the world, partnered with local Peruvian firms and poured $3.5 billion into the project. They brought expertise, technology, and a ruthless focus on deadlines. And when it opened, it immediately became the most capable Pacific port on the western coast of South America. Suddenly, the calculus around the Bioceanic Railway completely changed. Before Chancay, one of the biggest obstacles to the railway was the lack of a world-class port on the Pacific side. What's the point of building a transcontinental railway if there's nowhere to efficiently load and unload cargo at the other end? But now, that problem was solved, and China saw the opportunity. In July 2024, Brazil and China signed a memorandum of cooperation to launch a joint feasibility study for the Bioceanic Railway corridor. This wasn't just a polite diplomatic gesture. It was a formal commitment to explore whether the project could actually work, and more importantly, how China might be involved. Then, in August 2025, Bolivia suddenly re-entered the picture. The Bolivian president met with a high-level Chinese delegation in the country's constitutional capital of Sucre. They discussed infrastructure, trade, and economic cooperation, and for the first time in years, Bolivia's foreign minister publicly identified the Bioceanic Railway as a national strategic priority. So what changed? Why is Bolivia, the country that killed the project in 2019, now racing to get back in? The answer lies in geography and desperation. Bolivia wasn't always landlocked. In the late 19th century, it actually had a coastline along the Pacific Ocean. But during the War of the Pacific, a brutal conflict fought between 1879 and 1884, Bolivia lost that territory to Chile. Since then, it's been completely cut off from the sea. For a country rich in natural resources, this is, honestly, a catastrophe. Bolivia has vast reserves of lithium, iron ore, natural gas, and other valuable minerals. But getting those resources to international markets is, well, a logistical nightmare. Everything has to be trucked or railed through neighboring countries, often over rough terrain and through politically sensitive borders. The costs are crushing, the delays are constant, and Bolivia has very little leverage. For decades, Bolivian leaders have tried to negotiate access to Chilean ports, but those talks have gone nowhere. Relations between the two countries remain tense, and Chile has little incentive to offer Bolivia favorable terms. This is where the Bioceanic Railway becomes a game-changer. If the railway is completed, Bolivia would have direct land access to the Pacific via Peru. No dependence on Chile, no political hostages, no endless negotiations. Cargo could move from landlocked Bolivian mines to the Chiengse port in just a matter of days, then be loaded onto ships bound for Asia, Europe, or North America. And this isn't just about convenience. It's about economic survival. Bolivia's mining sector, which represents a huge portion of its GDP, has been hamstrung for generations by high transport costs. A functioning railway corridor could slash those costs, increase export volumes, and unlock billions of dollars in economic activity. So when China came knocking with investment offers, technical expertise, and a proven track record of building massive infrastructure projects on time and on budget, Bolivia didn't hesitate. This time, they're all in. So why is China so interested in a railway in South America? On the surface, it's about resources. China is the world's largest importer of soybeans, copper, iron ore, and lithium, commodities that South America produces in abundance. Brazil alone supplies nearly two-thirds of China's soybean imports. Bolivia and Chile are critical sources of lithium for electric vehicle batteries. Peru is a top copper exporter. Right now, almost all of those resources travel by ship. They leave South American ports, sail across the Pacific, and arrive in China weeks later. The routes are long, the costs are high, and the risks, piracy, weather, geopolitical tensions, are real. A transcontinental railway would change that equation. It would create a faster, cheaper, and more reliable supply chain. It would reduce dependence on maritime choke points like the Panama Canal, which has been plagued by droughts, delays, and skyrocketing fees. And it would give China more control over the flow of critical resources. But there's more to it than just logistics. The Bioceanic Railway is also a test case for China's Belt and Road Initiative in South America, a region that has largely been outside Beijing's infrastructure footprint until now. While the Belt and Road has reshaped parts of Asia, Africa, and Europe, South America has remained relatively untouched. If China can successfully build and operate a major railway corridor across the continent, it would mark a significant expansion of its global influence. It would demonstrate that Beijing can deliver on massive, complex projects, even in politically fragmented regions. And it would create a physical and economic presence that could last for generations. There's also the financial dimension. Projects like this create opportunities for Chinese banks, construction firms, engineering companies, and equipment manufacturers. They promote the use of the Chinese yuan in cross-border trade, and they build long-term economic dependencies that can be leveraged for political and strategic purposes. In short, the Bioceanic Railway isn't just a railway, it's a geopolitical play. But let's be clear, nothing about this project is easy. The first and most obvious challenge is the terrain. The Andes Mountains are among the most formidable mountain ranges on Earth. Building a railway through them means constructing tunnels at altitudes above 3,000 meters, where the air is thin, the weather is brutal, and the ground is geologically unstable. Engineers will need to blast through solid rock, reinforce tunnels against earthquakes, and build bridges across deep valleys. Every kilometer will be expensive, dangerous, and time-consuming. And that's just the mountain section. Then there's the financial challenge. The project is estimated to cost between $60 billion and $80 billion. That's an almost incomprehensible sum of money, especially for countries like Bolivia and Peru, which have limited fiscal capacity. Brazil, the largest economy involved, has made it clear that it won't shoulder the entire financial burden. China has indicated a willingness to invest, but even Beijing isn't going to write a blank check for $70 billion. There will need to be a complex financing structure involving development banks, private investors, and long-term revenue agreements. And even then, there's no guarantee the project will be profitable within a reasonable time frame. Infrastructure projects of this scale typically take 15 to 20 years to show returns, if they ever do. Investors need to be patient, governments need to remain committed, and the economic fundamentals need to hold steady over decades. That's a lot of ifs. And then there's the political risk. History has already shown us what happens when governments change their minds. Dilma Rousseff's impeachment derailed the project once. What's to stop a future election, coup, or policy shift from doing the same thing again? Transnational infrastructure requires continuity. It requires trust. It requires countries to honor agreements, even when political winds shift. And in a region as politically volatile as South America, that's far from guaranteed. There are also environmental concerns. Building through rainforests and mountain ecosystems will trigger fierce opposition from environmental groups, indigenous communities, and international watchdogs. Every meter of track will require impact assessments, permits, and consultations. Delays are inevitable. And yet, despite all of this, the project is moving forward. So what does all of this mean? If the Bioceanic Railway is actually built, it won't just connect 3 countries. It will fundamentally alter the economic geography of South America. It will reduce the continent's dependence on maritime routes. It will unlock landlocked regions. And it will create a direct overland link between 2 of the world's most important oceans. For Bolivia, it's a lifeline, a chance to escape the geographic trap that has strangled its economy for more than a century. For Brazil and Peru, it's an opportunity to expand trade, attract investment, and position themselves as logistics hubs for the entire continent. And for China, it's a foothold, a proof of concept, a demonstration that Beijing can reshape infrastructure and trade flows even in regions far from its own borders. But here's the question that nobody can answer yet. Will it actually get built? The history of this project is littered with false starts, broken promises, and political reversals. It's been proposed, delayed, canceled, and revived more times than anyone can count. And even now, with new momentum and Chinese backing, the challenges are staggering. Building a railway across the Andes is not a question of if it's possible. It's a question of whether anyone is willing to pay the price, endure the delays, and navigate the politics long enough to see it through. Because in the end, infrastructure isn't just about steel and concrete. It's about will. It's about belief. And it's about whether a handful of countries, separated by mountains and history and mistrust, can come together and build something that will outlast them all. The Bioceanic Railway is more than a transportation project. It's a test of ambition, of cooperation, and of whether the future of global trade will be written by ships or by trains. The clock is ticking. The route is drawn. The money is on the table. Now we wait to see if the railway that refuses to die will finally come to life.